The house stood at the very edge of the quiet neighborhood. Its tall wooden fence cut it off from the street, higher than any other in the area. The new family arrived on a warm Saturday morning, their moving truck parked in front of the driveway. The father unloaded boxes while the mother tried to keep their two children from running into the road. The first impression of the neighborhood was pleasant. Small houses with neat lawns, trees lining the sidewalks, birds calling from the branches. People waved politely, though few approached. Those who did offered short greetings, then quickly returned indoors. The air felt almost staged, like everyone was performing the role of a good neighbor, but without real warmth. On their first evening, the family gathered in their new kitchen. Through the open window, faint noises drifted across the fence. At first it sounded like a dog whining. Then, unmistakably, it became something human. A sharp cry, cut short as if swallowed by the night. The parents exchanged uneasy glances. The children, half asleep, barely noticed. The father dismissed it as imagination, a trick of the new surroundings. But when the second night brought the same sounds, followed by heavy thuds against wood or metal, his denial faltered. He considered knocking on the neighbor's door, yet every time he passed the gate he saw no signs of life. Curtains always drawn, lights dim, no cars parked outside. Days passed with the same routine. Neighbors on the street smiled but avoided eye contact when conversation drifted toward the tall fence. A woman from across the road once whispered, "Best to leave them alone," before hurrying away. The children grew curious. They often played ball in the yard, and sometimes the ball rolled near the forbidden fence. One afternoon, the daughter claimed she heard someone whispering from the other side. Not in anger, but pleading. She said the voice called for help. The mother told her not to repeat such stories, though unease shadowed her expression. The turning point came on a late evening. The father stepped outside for fresh air. The street was quiet, the sky dim with the last traces of twilight. He glanced toward the fence and, almost against his will, looked up at the second-floor window of the neighboring house. Behind the curtain, a movement caught his eye. He froze. For an instant pale hands pressed against the glass, thin wrists bound with metal chains. He blinked, and the curtain snapped shut. His breath quickened. The image burned into his mind, impossible to dismiss. He tried to reason with himself. Maybe it was a shadow, maybe old furniture. But the clarity of what he saw told another story. That night he could not sleep. The cries returned, sharper and more desperate. His wife stirred beside him, asking if he heard it too. He admitted he did. Together they listened, waiting for it to stop. And, as always, it did. A sudden silence, as if someone cut the air with a blade. The following morning, the father resolved to act. He walked along the sidewalk, stopped before the neighbor's gate, and studied the house. Its paint was weathered, the garden unkempt. No mail ever sat in the box. He pressed the doorbell, no answer. He knocked, louder and louder, until his own echo unnerved him. Finally, he stepped back, realizing every other curtain on the street had shifted, as if the whole block watched him in silence. When he returned home, his wife's face was pale. She had looked out from their upstairs window while he knocked. She swore she saw a figure in the neighbor's window. Not a child, not quite an adult. Watching. That evening the family sat together in the living room, the air heavy with tension. The father tried to assure everyone that they were safe, but his own unease leaked into every word. The children clung to their mother, refusing to go upstairs alone. When night fell, the sounds began again. This time there was no mistaking them. The cries rose louder than before, followed by the sharp clatter of metal dragging across the floor. The father grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the backyard. His wife begged him not to, but he could not stay inside any longer. He walked along the fence, shining the beam upward. For a brief second, light reflected off a pair of eyes in the darkness. Someone was there, staring back at him through the narrow gap between wooden planks. Then the face vanished. Sleep became impossible after that. Each night carried the same sequence: cries, silence, heavy footsteps, the figure at the window. The neighbors offered no explanations. When asked directly, they turned away. One man muttered under his breath, "You'll learn soon enough," before crossing the street. The father began documenting the sounds. He recorded them on his phone, convinced that proof might convince someone to act. But each recording contained nothing more than faint static, as if the noises dissolved whenever captured. One night, determined to uncover the truth, he climbed over the fence. His wife begged him not to, but he whispered that he needed to know what was happening. He landed quietly on the other side, the earth cold and damp beneath his shoes. The yard was wild with weeds. The house loomed above him, its windows dark except for a faint glow on the second floor. He moved closer, each step louder in his own ears. From inside came the low rhythm of chains shifting, then a sudden, sharp voice crying out. He crept to the window and peered through a thin gap in the curtains. What he saw froze him. A room stripped bare, a single mattress on the floor. Against the far wall, a figure sat with wrists locked in iron cuffs, the chains bolted to a radiator. The skin on the wrists was bruised and raw. The person lifted their head, eyes wide and hollow. Their lips moved silently, forming a single word: help. The father stumbled back, heart pounding. At that instant, another figure appeared in the doorway of the room, tall, unmoving, watching. The chained person lowered their head in fear. The curtain fell shut, cutting the view. He scrambled back over the fence, hands shaking. When he burst into his own yard, his wife met him at the door. She saw his face and understood he had seen something real. That night, neither of them spoke. They simply listened as the sounds returned, sharper, closer, more desperate. The neighborhood remained silent, houses dark, curtains drawn. In the days that followed, the family debated leaving. The father felt torn between escape and responsibility. Every time he considered packing, he remembered the chained hands at the window. Every time he thought of calling the authorities, he doubted they would believe him without proof. The cries continued. The silence that followed pressed heavier each night. And the neighbors kept their distance, watching, waiting, as if they knew what fate awaited anyone who tried to look too closely. One evening, as the sun set and shadows stretched across the street, the father stood at his window. The house beyond the fence loomed dark and silent. Yet in the upstairs window, the curtain shifted. Two pale hands pressed once more against the glass. Chains glimmered in the fading light. The father closed his eyes, knowing he could not unsee what he had seen. And when the cries pierced the night again, he realized with cold certainty that silence would never protect them. When Evan moved into the old brick house on Mill Street, he thought he had found a quiet place to focus on his studies. The building was ancient, with peeling paint and a sagging roof, but the rent was cheap. He was a student, and that was all that mattered. From the first day, he noticed something strange about the neighbors. He would nod or say hello in the stairwell, but they never answered. They didn't even look at him. Faces turned away, eyes fixed on the floor, silence heavy like a wall between them. At night, the house changed. Evan often lay awake in his small room, listening to the sounds in the hallway. Slow footsteps moved past his door, stopping and starting without rhythm. Sometimes he heard the drag of something heavy, like a bag scraping against the wooden floor. The noise always stopped near the basement door. He tried to convince himself it was nothing. Old houses creaked, neighbors carried things. But the sounds returned every night, always the same hour, always ending in silence below the stairs. One evening, while returning from the library, Evan noticed two men from the second floor carrying something down. It was a large black bag, sagging with weight. Their faces were pale, thin, expressionless. He greeted them. Neither replied. They didn't even blink. They moved past him, bag swaying between them, down into the basement. The next morning, he passed by the back alley behind the house. He saw those same men outside, shoveling white powder over the bags. Lime, he realized, because of the smell. It stung his nose and clung to the air. When they noticed him, their movements slowed. They stared at him for a long moment, then went back to work without a word. Evan felt his chest tighten. Why would anyone cover garbage with lime? Why always at night? Days passed. The silence of the neighbors became heavier. They never made noise during the day, but at night the house came alive with dragging sounds, muffled knocks, faint whispers below the floor. Curiosity pushed him to the edge. He began to time the nights, waiting for the hour the neighbors went downstairs. Through the crack of his door, he saw them. Always bags, always carried with effort, always swallowed by the basement door. One night he followed. He kept to the shadows of the stairwell, heart pounding, breath shallow. The men went down, their bag leaving a dark smear on the floorboards. Evan waited until the door shut, then stepped closer. The basement door was old, its wood warped. Through the gap, a cold draft touched his skin. He'd pressed his ear against it. Below, he heard shovels scraping, the thud of heavy things being dropped, and a faint hiss like sand pouring onto stone. When he pulled away, he saw something new. A mark had been scratched into the doorframe. A name. Faded but clear. Marissa. The next day he checked again. More names were scratched along the inside of the stairwell, small and hidden. Some were almost erased, some fresh. Dozens of them, maybe more. Evan's thoughts grew restless. He stopped sleeping, stopped focusing on his books. At night he sat by his door waiting. His notebook filled with observations. Times, sounds, the number of bags. He wrote down the names he could find on the walls. But questions gnawed at him. Who were these names? What lay inside the bags? Why cover them with lime? His fear fought with his need to know, and fear lost. One night, when the house was silent again, he crept to the basement door. His hand shook as he pushed it. The hinges groaned, echoing through the stairwell. The air that rose was cold and damp, thick with the smell of earth and lime. He held a flashlight, its weak beam trembling over stone steps that sank into darkness. He descended slowly, each creak of the wood sounding like a warning. The basement was larger than he expected, the walls rough and sweating with moisture. Against them, heavy bags lay piled, some torn open by rats. The smell was sharp, chemical, unnatural. And then he saw the walls. Every surface was covered in writing. Hundreds of names carved deep into the stone. Names repeating, overlapping, some written in shaky hands, others in neat lines. Evan stepped closer, shining his light over the inscriptions. His skin prickled as he read. The names stretched across the room, endless, circling him. He froze. Among them, faint and fresh, was his own. Evan's breath caught in his throat. His name carved into the wall looked recent, the edges sharp and clean, as if someone had scratched it only hours before. He touched it with his fingers. The stone crumbled slightly, leaving dust on his skin. He turned, flashlight shaking across the room. The piles of bags seemed to shift in the beam, their shapes uneven, as if something inside had settled long after being left there. The air pressed against him, heavy, damp, almost alive. From the shadows came a sound, a shuffle, a slow drag like cloth sliding over stone. Evan snapped off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed him, thicker than he thought possible. His ears filled with silence, broken only by his heartbeat. He stood still, forcing himself not to breathe too loudly. Then, voices. Whispers. Not one, but many, layered on top of each other. They rose and fell like a tide, too faint to understand but close enough to feel against his skin. He backed toward the stairs. His foot knocked against a bag, soft and heavy. Something inside shifted. He bit down on a cry. When he finally reached the steps, a glow bloomed above. The basement door creaked open. Light spilled down, outlining figures at the top. 3 of his neighbors stood there, silhouettes against the hall lamp. Their faces were pale, blank. Their eyes caught the light in a way that seemed too bright, too reflective. "Why are you here?" one of them asked, voice flat. Evan gripped the flashlight, words stumbling out. I heard noises." The men descended slowly, boots echoing. Behind them, more shapes filled the doorway, all of them from the building, silent, watching. "You should not be here," another voice said. Evan turned and bolted, brushing past them, shoving through the crowd in the hall. No one stopped him. They only stared. He slammed his door, locked it, and pressed his back against the wood. His chest heaved. For the rest of the night, the house stayed silent, not a step, not a whisper. The next morning, he thought of leaving, packing his few things and disappearing. But when he opened his window, he froze. Across the courtyard, in the opposite basement window, someone stood in the shadows, watching him, motionless. He shut the curtains. That day at the university, he tried to talk to a classmate about it. He barely finished describing the names when the classmate shook his head. "Don't get involved with that house," he said. His face went pale. "People don't last there." He wouldn't say more. Evan returned home at dusk. The hall smelled of lime again, fresh, sharp. The stairwell floor was marked with faint white footprints leading down. When night came, he couldn't resist. He left his door unlocked and waited. Hours passed. Then, the dragging sound returned, steps on the stairs, low voices. He followed again, though fear knotted his stomach. The basement door stood open this time. The light was on. Inside, the bags were gone. The walls looked cleaner, the names partly washed away. But on the far side of the room stood a single chair. On it lay a notebook. He picked it up. The cover was stained, corners torn. Inside were lists. Names, dates. Each one matched the carvings on the walls. The last page was half filled. At the bottom, written in a careful hand, was his name. A blank space waited after it. Behind him, the door closed. The click of the lock echoed. He turned, flashlight beam cutting through the air. The neighbors stood in a ring around the room. Their eyes glimmered in the dim light. Not one of them spoke. Then the whispers rose again, louder this time. They came not from the people, but from the walls, from the cracks in the stone, from beneath the floor. The names themselves seemed to breathe. Evan staggered back, clutching the notebook. The circle closed in. The smell of lime burned his nose. He shouted, demanded answers, but his voice drowned in the chorus of whispers. The neighbors reached out, not violently, but slowly, almost gently, guiding him toward the center of the room. The last thing his flashlight caught before it slipped from his hand was a new carving forming on the wall. The stone cracked, as if an invisible hand scraped into it. His name stretched wider, deeper, sealing itself among the others. The light went out. Above, the building returned to silence. And the next night, when the footsteps came again, someone else in the house pressed an ear to their door, listening, curious. Clara Simmons arrived in Milford on a rainy afternoon. The moving truck left her with a modest pile of boxes, and she stood in front of the little rental house that was supposed to mark the beginning of her new life. After the divorce, she wanted quiet, distance, and a clean slate. Milford looked like the kind of town where no one hurried, where life slowed down to the rhythm of rustling trees and the steady ringing of church bells. The house itself stood on a narrow street lined with maples. The paint peeled around the shutters, but the porch was sturdy and the rent was cheap. Clara felt relief as she unlocked the door. The rooms smelled of old wood and dust, but they were hers alone. The first knock on the door came before she had even finished unpacking. A smiling woman in her 60s introduced herself as Margaret. She held out a covered dish that smelled of stew. Her gray hair was pinned neatly, and her voice carried a strange warmth, as though she already knew Clara well. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Margaret said. "We always take care of newcomers here." That evening, Clara ate the stew at her small kitchen table. It was thick, filling, and oddly tangy. She chalked it up to unusual spices. By the time she finished, she felt heavy with drowsiness and slept earlier than she had in weeks. The pattern began at once. Each day, a different neighbor stopped by with food. A casserole from the couple across the street. Fresh bread from a tall man named Joseph. A basket of fruit from a teenage girl who never gave her name. Clara thanked them, smiling politely, though their persistence unsettled her. When she tried to ask about the town, the answers slipped away from her. "Milford's been here a long time," Joseph said with a shrug. "Quiet place," Margaret echoed, offering no more. "People don't move away much," said the teenage girl before hurrying off. Clara noticed something else. Whenever she returned from errands, curtains shifted in the houses nearby. Someone always seemed to be watching from behind glass. Their faces disappeared the moment she looked. She told herself she was overthinking, that the divorce had left her raw and suspicious. But she began eating less of the food. The strange aftertaste clung to every dish. It was metallic, as if the pots had been left unrinsed. Even the fruit tasted faintly bitter beneath its sweetness. One evening, Clara decided to cook her own dinner. She roasted vegetables, poured herself wine, and left the neighbors' dishes untouched. When she looked outside, she caught a row of faces in the dark windows opposite her house. They stood still, eyes fixed on her dining table. The next morning, Margaret appeared again, this time with a pie. She placed it firmly on the counter, ignoring Clara's polite refusal. "You should eat," she said. "It keeps you part of us." Clara laughed nervously, asking what she meant, but Margaret had already turned away. That night, the dream started. Clara saw her neighbors gathered in a circle, their faces pale and expressionless. They raised bowls to their lips in perfect unison. She woke with the taste of something bitter at the back of her throat. Over the following days, she noticed small changes in herself. Her reflection in the mirror looked washed out, as if her skin had lost color. Her appetite shrank, except for the food her neighbors brought. Whenever she forced herself to avoid it, nausea rolled through her stomach. The more she resisted, the more present they became. Their knocks on the door grew louder, their dishes heavier. Once, Joseph left a jar of dark liquid on her porch without explanation. When she picked it up, she saw dozens of fingerprints smudged across the glass. The town itself felt deserted. Stores closed early, streets emptied before dusk. Only her neighbors remained visible, lingering on porches or staring from driveways. Clara searched online for information about Milford, but found only a few references to its founding a century ago. No recent updates. No news. Almost as if the place had stopped existing outside its own borders. One evening, the power flickered. Lamps dimmed, then came back. She felt the house breathe around her. In the silence afterward, she swore she heard footsteps above her bedroom, though she knew the house had no second floor. She tried to tell herself it was loneliness playing tricks. But when she opened her fridge that night, she found every shelf filled with dishes she had never placed there. More pies, bowls of stew, slices of bread stacked neatly. All of it waiting, as if she had no choice. Clara slammed the door shut. Through the kitchen window, half a dozen neighbors stood in their yards, still as statues, staring into her house. Clara locked her doors and drew the curtains, but the feeling of being observed never left. The air inside grew thick, the silence unbearable. She kept the lights on through the night, but every shadow seemed to stretch longer than it should. 2 nights later, the power went out. The house sank into darkness. Outside, the street that had always glowed with porch lamps was black, every window dark. Clara grabbed a flashlight and moved cautiously through the rooms. A knock sounded on the front door, not a friendly tap, but a steady, deliberate pounding. She froze, the beam of her flashlight trembling against the wall. "Clara!" Margaret's voice floated through the door. "You mustn't hide. It is time." Clara backed away, heart hammering. She ran to the back door, only to find Joseph standing there, his outline visible against the faint moonlight. His face was calm, almost kind, but his eyes glinted unnaturally. "You belong here now," he said. "Don't resist." Clara bolted upstairs, though she had nothing to defend herself with. The flashlight beam shook across the bedroom walls. She pressed herself against the window, ready to scream for help, but the street was full of neighbors. Dozens of them stood silently, faces tilted upward, their eyes fixed on her window. Then the chanting began. Low at first, like a hum, then rising into words she could not understand. The sound vibrated through the floorboards. She felt her stomach twist, the same bitter taste flooding her mouth. Clara stumbled backward. The window glass rattled, the frame shivering as if under invisible pressure. She thought about calling the police, but her phone showed no signal. The town was cut off. Suddenly, every dish in her kitchen clattered at once. She heard bowls shatter, lids slam shut, metal spoons scrape against plates. The food she had refused to eat seemed alive, demanding her attention. Margaret's voice rose above the chanting. "Clara, the meal binds us. Without it, you will fade. With it, you will belong." Her flashlight flickered, then went dark. The house was swallowed in blackness. Clara stood still, trembling, when she felt movement around her. The air shifted. Hands brushed against her arms, though no one was there. Whispers circled her head. In the dark, she realized something terrible. The food had never been meant to nourish her. It was changing her, piece by piece. She remembered the pale skin, the shrinking appetite, the nausea. The neighbors weren't welcoming her, they were reshaping her. The chanting stopped all at once. Silence fell, heavier than before. A single candle flame appeared on her bedside table, though she had not lit it. Around the flame, shadows gathered, taking form. Faces leaned in, their eyes hollow and glistening. Margaret stepped out of the dark, her smile wide, her hands clasped together. You see now, no one leaves Milford. We feed one another, we share one spirit, and we never let go. Clara tried to scream, but her voice cracked. Her throat tasted of metal. She realized with horror that she already knew the words of their chant. The syllables echoed in her mind, pressing against her tongue. The neighbors closed in, their circle tightening around her. She wanted to run, to break through the window, but her body betrayed her. Her legs weakened. She sank to her knees as if pulled by an unseen force. Margaret knelt beside her, placing the pie gently in her hands. One bite, she whispered, and you will never be alone again. Clara's hands shook, but she could not let go. The scent of the pie was overpowering. Sweet, bitter, metallic. Her neighbors swayed in rhythm, their eyes shining with hunger and devotion. The candle flickered, and the walls of the house seemed to dissolve into darkness. Clara realized she was no longer inside her home, but standing in a vast, endless room filled with countless figures, all of them holding dishes, all of them watching. The first bite passed her lips before she could stop it. The bitter taste spread through her chest like fire. The circle of neighbors leaned closer, their smiles wide and unblinking. She felt herself sinking deeper into their rhythm, her voice finally breaking free into the chant she had resisted for so long. By morning, the lights in Milford glowed again. Curtains opened. The street looked quiet, peaceful, as if nothing had happened. Margaret carried a fresh dish to the porch of the little rental house. She placed it neatly by the door and looked up at the window where Clara now stood, pale-faced, smiling faintly, watching the street the way the others did. No one ever left Milford.